With us today is the chair of Startup 20, Dr. Chintan Vaishnav. Dr. Chintan Vaishnav is also the director of Atal Innovation Mission, and he will be briefing you about Startup 20, which is an Indian innovation when it comes to G20 engagement groups. Before we begin, I'd just like to set the ball rolling with regard to what an engagement group is, because I think this is the first engagement group meeting in Goa. Whereas the media is familiar with working group meetings, they're not so much familiar with the engagement group meetings. An engagement group meeting, in contrast to a working group, is where non-governmental actors of G20 countries get together and discuss and give policy suggestions to the G20 governments so that can be incorporated in their buying policy communique. This is the first, like I said, this is the first engagement group meeting in Goa, and it is the third Startup 20 meeting. The first one happened in Hyderabad, and the second one was in Sikkim. So without further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Chintan Vaishnav to explain what Startup 20 is all about and what the expected outcomes are.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for joining us. Startup 20, as was mentioned, is an engagement group. It's the newest engagement group, or the only new engagement group in the G20 architecture this year. It was proposed by India and agreed to by other nations, so we have created it. This is an important policy movement that I want to share with you for two reasons. First, there has never been an engagement group dedicated to startups. So startups work did take place in G20 sometimes before before this point, but it always took place as a part of some other engagement group, for example B20 or the Business 20. But because Business 20 also thinks about corporations and there are enough things to discuss there, startups never got enough bandwidth. This year, for the first time, we agreed to create an engagement group for startups, which means startups get a chance to produce a policy recommendation or the policy communique, which will go to the G20 leaders to recommend to them how we want the global startup ecosystems to work together. In the previous session, there was a very nice phrase used, you probably heard that, can we make a global startup nation? So that is a unique policy moment. In some ways, just by the very creation of this group, one has created the world's highest policy forum for startups. Second, I want to also say that now in G20 architecture, there are two groups. There's the B20, the Business 20, which thinks about large corporations. There's Startup 20, which is the newest engagement group, thinks about startups. And it gives the G20 architecture a very unique sort of power, which I'd like to call it, that it makes it ambidextrous. So on one hand, there's the power of the innovative startups who can move fast, find needs, and innovate. On the other hand, there's a power of the scale-up capabilities of large corporations, the stability of large corporations. The question is, how do we sort of bring this together? Getting to Goa, and I'll just be very brief about it. Getting to Goa, we launched this group with the inception meeting in Hyderabad. That was in the end of January this year. There has been one more second meeting, physical meeting has been in Sikkim. That was in the roughly in the third week of March. And this is the third meeting in the very short span, with really enormous participation. 500 plus delegates physically participated in these meetings before getting here from more than 20 countries. And we have produced this collective document, the policy communique, which speaks to 5 different areas. The foundation for global startup ecosystem, how to form alliances, how to unlock financing, how to be more inclusive, and how to promote sustainable startups that make the world more sustainable. So in a very short span, we have produced this. We also have been intensely consultative. On the 21st of May, we even made our communique public. So at that point, on our website, so there's really nobody excluded from this communique at this point. And you'll be happy to know that close to 800 comments were there until 3 days ago from 15 countries where people, 50% of them are startups on the ground saying whether this document makes sense for them. So I'm very happy that we are here for the Goa Sankalpana. The agenda is that tomorrow, beyond tomorrow's meeting, we hope that we would have agreed to much of the communique. If there are some deviations, obviously we'll accommodate them. But the Sankalpana will actually achieve its goal. As you know, Sankalpana means collective resolve, and hope we will reach a collective resolve that will become historic, and therefore Goa in startup history of the world will also find a place beyond as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We can move on to round of Q&A. Before we begin, I would just like to set some guidelines. Before you ask your question, kindly introduce yourself and the organization that you represent. And I also request that you keep questions specific to Startup 20 and startups in the world.
Yeah, I'm Rupesh from PT Address Trust of India. Will there be ministerial meetings on this Startup 20 also?
By ministerial, you mean
The IT ministers of different countries, will they come together and discuss this, or this is just up to Startup?
I see, yes. So well, that's a very important question. See, a lot of many times startups are considered equivalent to IT. But startups are there in many domains, right? IT is only one of the domains where startups are there. Startups can be any MSME, from any sector. Today, if you look at startups, you find startups in hardware-oriented startups, service-oriented startups, process-oriented startups, and so IT is only one component of it. This is one of the things that Startup 20 group is trying to do, that this is a group about all startups. And in fact, many of the nations who have become very successful with startups, think about Israel, for example, United States, for example. Many of their startups, which we may or may not know about, which may be a B2B startups, are actually not IT startups, or they are like, they're making tractors, or they're making whatever, water pumps. And so that's the direction in which we want to go also as a nation. And the Gurugram meeting, coming to your question, the Gurugram meeting of Startup 20 is sort of an equivalent of ministerial meeting, although it is not a ministerial meeting, because this is not a finance or a Sherpa group.
So, Shama from Doordarshan. So, what are the highlights of the communique that you have posted, and what are the comments? Some of the comments that you would like to highlight.
So the highlights, there are. The highlights possibly in would probably comprise of 5 calls to action. First is, can we allocate $1 trillion of the global GDP, about 1% of the global GDP, to startup ecosystems by 2030. It's ambitious, but that's what, if we really want to leverage this force. Second, of course, this is all not agreed to. I mean, there's one more day of meeting to be done, and maybe a couple more weeks of some more deliberation. But anyway, this is what it proposes. Second, can we a global sort of definitional framework? It's a major step, you know. Third, can we ease market access for startups globally? These are not in the order of importance or anything. Fourth, can we create a network, so through many to many linkages? See, all countries have centers. Can we have nodal access points and agencies that become access points for startups in those nations? And can we create a network of these incubators, accelerators, what have you? And then I said 4, right?
Yes.
Fifth, can we emphasize focusing on underrepresented communities in startup ecosystems, in being inclusive of them? And build a
how many startups, sorry, probably I'm Samir Nagekar from Dominica TV. Sir, I have 4 questions. How many startups, registered startups there in Goa? When it comes to own startups, which spot they hold compared to other states? And in which sectors there are higher contributions by own startup? And what are there is any prominent place or spot in your program Startup 20 for own startup?
Wait a minute, what was the 4th question?
There is something prominent or something special
yes.
spot for Goan Startup in Startup 20 program.
Okay, yes, sure. So Goa has about 400 registered startups. Which means, I don't know if you were there when they were there when I mentioned.
Yeah, but I want to give more brief about it.
Yes. So this means 400 startups for 15.7 lakh people. That is one startup in 4,000 people. If you go to European nations, smaller European nations, that's the rate of startups there. Like if you go to the startup nation of the world, Israel, for example, one startup in 1400. But if you go to France or Germany, or one startup in anywhere between 2,000 to 4,000 types. So that's the rate that we're talking about. Now the nature of startups may be different. Your third question was, what are the sectors, right? So what I see is that, so I was looking at Atal Innovation Mission's data for Goa. 50% of the registered startups in Goa in that data were hospitality, food and beverages sector. which I think is a strength because Goa is demonstrating to other smaller states as to how this is uniquely a Goa startup ecosystem. They don't really need to go copy somebody else. This is Goa. This is what we do the best. And so I think that's really very promising. Within Startup 20, your fourth question, there are two things happening. This afternoon, there will be Startup 20X talks. There are 5 talks featured. 2 of them are Goa, 2 of those 5 startups. Second, there is a startup showcase downstairs with 40 plus startups. About 1/4, one fourth or more are Goa startups. Is that good?
Any further questions?
रितेश फ्रॉम इंडिया टुडे सर कल जब मिनिस्टर पीयूष गोयल से बात कर रहे थे तब बताया जा रहा है कि गोवा में जो लोकल स्टार्टअप्स है वो रजिस्टर्स नहीं हो रहे बिकॉज लिंक नहीं हो रहे, तो इसके लिए आपके कुछ प्लान्स हैं क्या उनको मेन इसमें लाने के लिए? और दूसरी बात, जो स्टार्टअप्स बनाए जा रहे हैं, स्टार्टअप्स हो रहे हैं, उसमें लोकल्स गोल्स कितने हैं?
Good question. So, see, ये Goa is not a uniquely Goa problem. Like for instance, if you look at DPIIT registrations of startups, today it must be around 99,000 if you go online. But if you look at private databases of startups, which may or may not be registered, you will find almost 30% more companies that are at incubators but are not yet officially registered. Now, to some extent it's a choice. ये कोई compulsion नहीं है. अगर आपको registration से benefits लेने हैं तो आप register करो. You are still registered as a company. You are not registered as a startup. You understand? And so, in that sense, there's a question to be asked that must one force every company to register themselves as a startup? If it wants to not register as a startup but wants to register as MSME, etc., they can, right? So ये uniquely Goa issue नहीं है, and one has to, in some ways, retain their freedom to do what they want to do because they are balancing their risks and rewards, and you don't want to strong arm them into something. If we create the right incentives and environment for them, obviously they will want to, right? But वो stages में भी होते हैं ना, क्योंकि अभी बहुत early stage हैं, अभी registration करेंगे तो compliance वगैरह चालू हो जाएगा, वो ऐसे भी early stage होते हैं, colleges etc. में you will find them. So it's a balance one is trying to strike. What was the second part of your question?
कितने locals goals हैं?
हाँ, locals कितने हैं? हाँ. So actually I have to gather data. Don't know. What I do know is, let's see. I was looking at Goa data. Let me see if I can. I'll just. I'll try to pull up कितने jobs created वगैरह हैं. But उसमें से Goans precisely Goan कितने हैं वो नहीं पता है. Answer नहीं है. But on the top of my mind, I don't have an answer.
Any further questions? Is there anything you would like to add further now that we had another question?
Yeah. No, I think, well, Goa, again, as I said, I was also in the inaugural, I was saying that this was the first place I visited I've been very inspired by how much emphasis there has been on innovation and entrepreneurship here. And again, how much awareness that it has to be a Goa-centric model, and it will fly. Nothing to worry. I mean, there's no need for everybody to do AI and robotics and whatever. So I think I'm very excited about it. I use Goa example in many places where I speak. I hope Goa will keep going, and I hope all of you will contribute to its, galloping forward. Thank you very much for your time.